Hello, listeners. If you've enjoyed these narrations, please click on that like and subscribe button. Let me know in the comments section if you like these creepypasta stories that are a part of a series. Thank you. My grandfather included me in his will before he died. I'm starting to think I shouldn't have gone to his funeral. We were never close. I've actually barely even knew the man. Only what my dad had told me. Ex-military, lost a leg in a car accident, filthy rich, single ever since my grandmother passed away. I used to hate him, really hate him. I saw the man maybe once or twice in my life, and I don't remember much of it, meaning it didn't matter even to remember. He's never tried to be a part of my life, never tried to be my grandfather. All I had were mailed birthday cards and some pricey Christmas presents. I moved into a single-room apartment when I began college, and really struggled with finances for a while. I remember trying to call him, ask him for help. He never picked up any of those calls. While I know I didn't have any right to any of his money, it still stung a little that I didn't even get the chance to ask. It made me despise him even more. But alas, here I sit among the maybe dozen other, not including my parents. Shouldn't rich people have a lot of people come to their funerals? I mean, the only reason I came is because I got a call last week.
Your grandfather has died,
the deep voice said on the other end. I scoffed loudly. Good riddance.
You're on his will, but there's one condition.
I turned pale at that. In his will? Maybe the old fart really did leave me something. Maybe something valuable. Something to get me out of all this debt. Maybe he left me his house. His mansion?
Hello?
The voice spoke again. I coughed. Sorry, excuse me. What'd you say?
Your grandfather left you something in his will, but there's one condition.
He repeated once more. What's the condition? I was getting tipsy, excited. I remember my leg was rapidly tapping on the cheap concrete floors of my apartment like it was my 18th birthday, and I was just getting a car.
You need to come to his funeral.
What? That's it? I said out loud before I could think twice.
Yes,
the man said, and the line disconnected. Where was his funeral even be? When? He didn't give me any information at all. My phone buzzed with another alert. There was a message from an unknown number, the number that had just called. It contained a date, a time, and an address, with one message: don't be late. I told my father about it, and he said, quoting, "If we weren't invited, why should we go?" I didn't mention anything about the will to him. I don't think he'd take kind to that. I mean, I must have seen that old man maybe once my entire life, and I don't even remember it. The only reason why I know how he looks is thanks to the few pictures that used to hang in my parents' house. Last time I checked, they've even been replaced with mine or my siblings' pictures. I thanked God that I didn't have to buy a cab to the designated funeral home. It was actually just a walk away from my apartment. I mean, not that I believed in God, but sometimes you just gotta thank God, even if you don't believe, right? The funeral home was quite standard, not something I would have expected from a filthy rich man. But maybe he wanted to return to his roots with his passing. The poor people roots. My grandfather wasn't born rich, although I don't know when or even how, but he got to that point in his life of millionaire status. The room that contained his casket was square in shape, about 9 feet tall, maybe 70, not 80 feet long and wide. The walls were painted a grayed out white color. And the first thing I noticed were the 4 crosses hanging on each wall, centered perfectly in the middle. The odd thing was, they were all upside down. and I didn't see any of the usual pictures of Jesus or even anything related to Christianity. There were 20-something folding chairs placed in the middle of the room, in 5 rows of 4 each, and maybe more than half were being used at random points. I looked around, mainly to see if I knew anybody here, maybe some distant uncle or a long-lost aunt. These people looked anything but normal. A middle-aged man was seated in the second to the last row of chairs. He wore a black suit and black costume shoes. He had a gray tie and a top hat on the top of his very bald head. Fairly normal, you might think. Well, if you exclude the weird tattoos on every single visible part of his skin, then yeah, I'd say normal. Next, I noticed a woman sitting on the second to the first row. She wore a black and red dress with simple sneakers. She had long, glowing red hair that was let loose below her shoulders. I would also call her normal, were it not the 2 goat-like horns coming out the side of her head. I could have sworn this was the succubus herself. And I got even more convinced after seeing her gorgeous face. Gray eyes, rose-red lips, pointed nose, perfectly angled eyebrows, and best of all, it didn't even look like she had any makeup on. I would have asked her out right there on the spot, were it not for those 2 intimidating-looking horns. Then there was this kid too, seated at the very front. He wore blue overalls and dirty grayed-out sneakers, which used to be white. He had a messy brown hair that was trimmed on one side, but most of it was covered by the cowboy-like hat that was sitting on the top of his head. He looked like a normal farm boy. He really did look normal. The weirdest of them all, though, was this thing. It didn't look human. It was covered in hair, fur maybe. It was tall, taller than the room itself. It was wide enough to take up 2 chairs in the 3rd row. But the face, human. Perfectly fucking human. He had lips, he had eyes, a nose, a normal human skin. I almost turned around and left, but I just decided to sit next to the boy. Almost some company in this weird crowd that looked like they came straight from a circus performance. I politely smiled at anyone that decided to put their judging eyes on me, while making sure to swiftly walk past them as fast as possible. I took an empty seat at the very front row. Second to last, the young boy was on my left. There were a couple of small speakers at the corner of the room playing some soothing piano.
How did you know him?
A very low, demonic-like voice came from my left. The boy just blinked at me and scratched his chin. I'm sorry. I was bright red, so they're all a bunch of weirdos after all.
It's okay,
the boy said in his demonic voice, and then smiled. It made me flinch. He was my grandpa, I replied to his previous question, his eyes growing wide, full of excitement.
Really? It's so nice to meet you. My name is Louis.
Do you understand just how unsettling it is to hear a demonic voice be excited? He reached out a small hand, and of course I took it and shook it. Nice to meet you, Louis. My name is Blanco. I grinned at him. I wanted to ask him why his voice was like that. I wanted to ask him what was wrong with all these people here, why they looked the way they did. But I couldn't. And I surely wouldn't. How did you know my grandpa?
Oh, he was my business partner,
he blurted out. I flinched again. The sound of a loud footstep came from the entrance to the room, and both me and Louis turned to look. It was a tall man, wearing white robes and a priest-like hat. Is that what you call them? I really don't know. His loud footsteps continued until he reached the open coffin. I noticed that the soothing piano music had stopped playing. The tall man got down on one knee and raised a cross into the air, holding it upside down.
May you burn in hell,
he said.
May you burn in hell.
An ocean of voices repeated after him, including Lewis. What is going on here? Was this old man a Satanist or something? Why did my dad not warn me about this when I asked him about the funeral? Come to think of it, he seemed a little surprised, startled even when I asked, like he hadn't even known his own father had died. The tall man stood up again and turned to face us. His eyes gazed upon all of us until his gaze landed on me and stayed fixed. His expressionless face turned into something resembling a very unnoticeable half smile. He walked up to me and reached out his hand.
Mr. Shingoku's grandson. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Ezekiel.
I reluctantly took hold of his hand. His grip was tight, too tight in fact, and shook my hand for way too long. Way too long. I almost winced in pain. I think I saw him smile for the briefest of moments.
We talked on the phone, remember?
We did? And then it struck me. His voice matched the deep voice that informed me of the will. Oh yeah, we did. I answered my own question, the tall man nodding. He turned back around and began walking to the casket again.
I shall begin reading the contents of the will,
Ezekiel informed us.
I already know Ezekiel will be reading my will. So before we start, I sincerely want to thank you, Ezekiel. I also want to thank you all for doing wonderful business with me for all these decades. I can only hope we can meet in the burning flames of hell. To Ezekiel, I leave my hellhounds. You're the only one I can trust with that good dog. Take good care of him. To Margaret, I leave my monastery and flower garden. I'm sure you can brew wonderful potions with these new tools. To August, I leave my organ and severed limb collection. Try not to make Frankenstein while I'm dead, eh? And lastly, to Blanco, I leave my cabin in the woods and all it entails. Fairy coin collection, private note, rule book, and all my previous business partners for you to pick right back up. Ezekiel rolled the paper back up again and made it vanish into thin air. What kind of magic trick is that? So I got some properties and coins. I hope they're worth something, so I didn't come here for nothing. I glanced at Lewis sitting beside me. He was sulking. What's wrong? I asked before thinking better of it. Lewis didn't get anything,
the demonic voice responded. I flinched for a fifth time. I need to stop doing that. I didn't really know how to respond to Lewis, so... You want the fairy coins or whatever? His eyes lit up again.
Really?
No, Ezekiel interrupted.
Those coins were left for Mr. Blanco. You know how and why he'll need them.
I just looked up again, with a confused expression, a question at the tip of my tongue.
Your grandfather's notebook will explain everything once you receive it.
I nodded along. I didn't care about that. I cared about the cabin in the woods. I could sell that. How about the cabin and the coins then?
You'll get those too in due time. You need to study up first if you want to replace Mr. Shingoku.
Replace him? Replace him how? I didn't sign up for no job. I'm already studying for one. And what's up with Shingoku? That's not his first, middle, or last name. Maybe this is the wrong funeral. No, he mentioned me by name. But maybe it's a coincidence.
Blanco,
a demonic voice said beside me and I flinched. Yeah? I responded back in the real world, if you can call this real.
Everyone is leaving.
Lewis stood up and motioned with his small, child hands to the almost empty seats. I noticed Ezekiel talking to the fur man. Yeah. Goodbye, Lewis, I stood up and said, feeling confident that I won't see him again. Lewis overall catch on fire from the bottom. Hey, watch out, man. I tried to warn him, but the fire spreaded fast.
I'll see you soon,
the demonic voice said, excited, and then Lewis burnt up, leaving no trace behind. What the hell? Yeah, probably hell. Before I leave, Ezekiel handed me a hardcover book. I thought it was a notebook. The tall man scratched his neck.
Yeah, he wanted it printed out. That old man.
I nodded and took the book. It's whitish gray, besides black letters spelling out rule book. So, what did my grandpa do for you all? Like, what kind of work was he in? I let the curiosity get the better of me and asked. Ezekiel gives me a genuine smile.
To summarize, he collected souls, but he was a jack of all trades by the end of his time.
Collected souls? I gulped down my saliva and nodded to Ezekiel as a form of goodbye. I could see the remaining two people looking at me with hungry eyes.
In case you have any questions, just call me,
he said as I walked out the door. Oh, don't worry, I will, I shouted back to him, running. I looked at the book after I got home. It had a lot of different chapters covering a lot of batshit crazy sounding stuff, starting with Soul Collecting 101 and ending with How to Cheat Death. I think I'm gonna take my time reading this one.